Right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Shakina Williams. I'm Director of Global Initiatives for the Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership, CWEL, and also WinLab, our 5-month accelerator program. During unprecedented times, it's very essential that communities all over the world come together to solve problems and support each other. The CWEL and the WinLab team is taking all actions to find solutions in these current issues, while simultaneously providing support for entrepreneurs and small businesses and sustaining and accelerating growth while adjusting to these new market conditions. Today, our webinar is entitled Immediate Action, Financing Strategies and Cost Flow Management. Our session facilitator is Jason Allen, who is the Vice President of Investments at MassVentures. Jason will be discussing business funding and practical strategies to better manage your cash flow in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone for having me. Thank you to Babson College and the WinLab. I'm humbled to be a part of this. And so I hope that today I can provide a little bit of clarity on this uncertain time. I'll start with a story. So when I graduated college, I graduated right before the first financial crisis in 2008, and I was looking for jobs, and I got a job at a startup in Boston called Custom Made Ventures. But right after the financial crisis hit, my offer was rescinded, and so they had to make decisions, very difficult decisions, so that they could stay afloat, meaning freezing their hiring. And I know there's a number of people who might have gone through this before, either personally or in other aspects of their life. So hopefully I could add a little bit of clarity on that subject. So first of all, it's an ugly deck. I'm an English major. I'm not an artist. So hopefully this will be helpful, but it's not going to be the most beautiful thing that you've ever seen. So here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to talk a little bit about MassVentures, myself, and some government aid programs. I had some insight today from conversations with the New England Venture Capital Association that I'm happy to share with you at both the federal and the state level. And then I'm going to go into cash flow management strategies and some of the things that I just talked about, which is the hiring freezes, pay cuts, and some strategic initiatives, and just how you can think about your business navigating through these times. As you know, my mom and dad always used to say, and I'm sure you might have seen the Under Armour advertisement, the only way out of this is through it. And so hopefully this will give you some thoughts on that. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about some additional financial strategies, some books and resources that I recommend, and I believe that this deck will be distributed after the session. Additionally, again, I'm a huge supporter of this initiative at Babson, and so I am happy to take calls, meetings, emails, conversations with anyone after this offline. All right, so MassVentures. MassVentures is a quasi-public venture capital firm. That means it acts independently, but it has state oversight. We invest in the pre-seed round and the seed stage startups, so companies that have just a PowerPoint or maybe just a little bit of traction. We like to invest early on. Our average check size is about $300,000 to $500,000. Sometimes we go a little bit below that. Sometimes we go a little bit above that. And we have a grant program, which may or may not be relevant to the folks here. It's for companies that have received small business, what's called SBIR funding. So the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, if they have an RFP that goes out and you win that RFP, we provide a matching grant program for those companies that are here in Massachusetts. The two people you see there are the two investment professionals. Our president is Charlie Hipwood. He was just appointed in January, and then there's me as the vice president. We have a few other folks there, and one other full-time person and another part-time person, but that's the firm. A little bit about me, just to give you a little bit of clarity. I'm at MassVentures now, early stage venture capital. I was at a firm called Launch Capital, which is a family office here in Boston as well. And before that, I worked at Ovia Health, which is a women's digital health company. If you've ever seen the app or had a friend who's used the app that says, you know, your baby's the size of a Game Boy, that's us. That was us. I don't want to say anymore. Another firm called Log Me In, Ativio, and Custom Made, which I actually ended up getting that job later after they got the funding. A little bit more about me. I went to divinity school here in Boston. I went to law school at Northeastern, and then I have a BA in English literature. Happy to talk about career paths later as well. So let's dive in. So the government aid programs, as you've all probably heard, the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security Act, or CARE Act, was just passed. And there are a number of provisions in there that are primarily focused on brick and mortar stores, so like restaurants, retail locations, but there are a few that might apply to startups. So I'll just go through a few of these, and then I'll pick out a few provisions that might be interesting to you. So the first is there is a disaster assistance loan for up to $2 million for small businesses affected by COVID-19. Then there's an express loan program. So can I get a hand raise? Any e-commerce companies or e-commerce entrepreneurs on the line if you just use the check mark? Or hand raise? Either. Got it. So this might apply to you because it's for folks who are selling overseas, have overseas sales. So that might be something that's interesting to you. And then, as I mentioned, it's mostly for brick and mortar locations, but there's some conversations happening in Washington to help startups, because not all startups are like Uber that have received billions and billions of dollars of venture capital financing. Those companies can go back to another venture capitalist and get money. There are other companies who may be bootstrapped or might have just started that still could fit within this category, and you might provide jobs to 1 to 2 to 3 people. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So here are a couple of areas where you might find some relief from the government at the federal level. So the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program was formerly used prior to COVID-19 for disasters. So if you had a pizza shop and a hurricane came through, you can apply for this grant, this loan program. Because of COVID-19, this has been expanded to include COVID-19, and that basically is every business that's been affected. So how does this work? So the details are you can apply for a loan of up to $2 million. It's a 30-year term, 3.75% interest rate for small businesses, and the first month's payment is deferred. So something to look into because virtually every company is affected. Of course, millions and millions of companies are going to apply for this, but this is something to think about if you have revenues. Excuse me, what do I have here? Okay, a little bit more. These provisions have been expanded. So before COVID-19, you had to have some sort of collateral. Now you can get approved solely on your credit score. You don't need to repay on your tax return. If you had a prior bankruptcy, that won't disqualify you. Anything that's under $200,000 can get approved without a personal guarantee. So you don't have to put your house up, which is great. One other thing that might be interesting is, and might be pertain to some of the companies here, is, you know, you can receive up to a $10,000 emergency grant cash advance that can be forgiven if it's spent on paid leave, maintaining payroll, or increasing costs for supply chain disruption. So let me just talk a little bit more about that because, as I mentioned, we had a conversation with the New England Venture Capital Association today, and there are some more details on how startups might be able to use some of this money. And so I will provide this information after the fact, but just for the moment, if you have a question, feel free to type it in. We can talk later, or I can forward this to you. All right, so under the CARE Act, Section 7A, there is a Paycheck Protection Program. You might have heard about this. So I'm going to just talk really deliberately so that you hear me, and then we can talk about it later. So small businesses with less than 500 employees are eligible for up to $10 million in retroactive loans, retroactive to February 15, 2020. They can be forgivable if they're used on payroll, or designated operating expenses. Under this program, the first payment is deferred for up to 6 months, and it's an interest rate of 0.5%, 2 years of maturity, and 100% guaranteed by the Small Business Association. So just to kind of double click on that a little bit, how would that be used? Okay, so this is some details I got today. You can apply for this loan up to 2.5 times your average payroll of 2019. So if you had $100,000 in payroll of 2019, you can apply for a loan of up to $250K. And if you use this within 8 weeks of getting it to keep people employed, paid leave, it's forgiven. So you don't have to pay it back. So that's great. So we might have some questions about that in a bit, but that's something that I learned today. It might be interesting for those of you on the call. So in terms of deadlines for all of this, I think it's tomorrow. So you can start applying tomorrow. So there'll probably be some questions on where you would go or how it would work, but essentially you go to whatever bank that you use and tell them that you're interested in the program, and they can get you an application. It's not like you go online or anything like that. Okay, local governments. So I'm sure we have, is there anybody from Florida on the line? Hands raised, we've got some Floridians here. Oh, great. Ah, man, the weather is so good down there. I wish I was going to go down to Florida, and then obviously all this happened with my wife, so hopefully I'm looking forward to going back there in the future. But talking about local government aid programs, here in Massachusetts, there's a $10 million Small Business Recovery Loan Fund. Massachusetts businesses under 50 employees impacted by COVID-19, which is basically everybody. Nothing's due for up to 6 months, and you can apply for up to $75K. In Florida, they have a $50 million fund under 100 employees, and it's very similar. So I would go to your local website, and I have resources at the end of the presentation that you may want to use to do some research there, but there's some opportunities there. So let's see. Just to recap the government side of things, it really depends on your business. So if you have revenues already, if you have employees, then it probably makes, this is something that you might want to consider. If you're pre-revenue, it's hard to think about how you would fit into this program. There are grants and other things available. I understand that Facebook has a grant program for marketing expenses for companies that are impacted, but just something to consider. A lot of these are loans, so you're going to need to pay it back. Now, it could get deferred, but something to think about there. Okay. Cash flow management. Okay, so this is a tough one because you may be experiencing this. You may have to have the same conversation that the people had to have with me when I was at Custom Made, where I was like, all right, I'm moving out of my mom's house. I'm excited. I got this job. It's all lined up. And then I get a phone call and they say, actually, you don't have that job anymore. You need to go back to J. Crew and start folding some clothes, which is what I had to do for a little bit. But these are some of those difficult conversations. And the way that I like to think about it is, how do you think about your personal finances, right? So what is a need to have versus a nice to have? And if you've ever been in that position, whether it's in a business or in a personal setting, it's kind of like, okay, well, I know that I need internet, right? But I don't know if I need every subscription to Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime. I'll pick one, right? And I think of it that way. So if you have a business, you definitely need AWS. You definitely need to make sure that you have your payroll software. So those are the things that are important. But if you have software or different expenses that were kind of, when you look back on it in the moment, may not have been necessary. You may want to look back on that. Trim back the nice to have expenses and have conversations with those vendors and see if they can accommodate. So this is one of those times when it's like people in Miami may not know this, but up here when it snows, you kind of feel like you're all together with your neighbors, right? So you start to talk to people a little bit more. It's like, oh wow, look at all the snow. Let's get together. This is kind of this is kind of like that. So if you have a vendor, maybe you can talk to that vendor and say, listen, we are going to have some tough times. Can we come to some sort of agreement where, you know, I get my payments for this service deferred for, you know, 3 months or a couple of months, or I get a discount if I pay up front. Those are different ways that you want to think about that. The next thing to think about is do what you have to do to keep people, but you also have to keep the business alive. Now, what do I mean by that? It's harder, it's more difficult from my experience to have to lay people off and get rid of people, and then have to rehire those people again, compared to trying to, you know, talk to people about reducing salaries, hiring freezes. Maybe you let someone go who maybe just started. I know those are difficult conversations, but those are the things that happen. So let me just give you some examples from our portfolio companies. Obviously, I won't mention any names, but you know, a lot of our portfolio companies who are well capitalized have had to make some very difficult decisions, because, you know, basically if you have in-person sales, you know, you can't do that. You can't travel anymore. So they had to reduce staff, or the senior leadership team has decided to take payroll cuts. They might have moved some people who were full-time to part-time for benefits purposes. And so it's just kind of like, how can you get creative there to make sure it's like, you know, we value you as an employee. We value this partnership. You know, it can't continue like this because of the current environment. How can we work together? So those are some things that we have to do. Now, if you have to reduce staff, you have to be intentional, you have to be honest, and you have to be upfront. And so, so the best way to explain it is, on the one hand, you want to do this once, and you want to do it very intentionally, so that people who are left don't feel concerned or afraid. And so what I've seen in previous companies is you look at your financial model and you say, you know, if there wasn't COVID-19, we would be making X. Now that there's COVID-19, we're going to be making Y, and we will run out of cash in 4 months. All right, what's the difference there? So we need to reduce, I'll just say, you know, $50,000 of overhead expenses. So then you have to make the decision, who is that? So it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a person from product, maybe there's a person from sales, maybe there's a person from engineering. You just have to make those kinds of decisions. But once you make that decision, you do it, and then you have a meeting with the team and say, you know, that was a difficult time. We're here together. This gives us runway to last for the long time. Nobody needs to be concerned about their jobs. We did it. We're done. As opposed to, I've seen, oh, just cut a little bit now, and then 3 months later, we'll cut a little bit more, and then 3 months later, and then you get those really bad reviews on Glassdoor, if you know what I'm talking about. It's just kind of like, oh, you know, this isn't a very stable environment. The manager doesn't know what they're doing. That's the way that you kind of handle those situations. Be realistic. I would also plan, just as a thought process here, what we've been telling our companies is, you know, expect reduced sales of up to 30 to 40%. Expect your existing customers to, most of them, not most of them, but you know, 20% of them to churn off, and then try to get to a place where you can survive for about 18 months. Okay. Financial model assumptions. Has anybody here built a financial model for their business before? Check marks, hands. Right. See a few. Well, that's great. So that's a difficult thing, but what you want to do is try to build a scenario that is, oh, this is the best case, and this is the absolute worst case. If we have no sales, all these things happen. And that way that gives you the visibility and the insight to make the decisions that you need to make. So again, my points here, assume sales slow down significantly in Q2, assume churn, you churn your customer base. And then I just have an example here, right? So if you lose 30% of sales over the next 2 months, what does that do to your revenue, and what do you have to cut to keep the doors open? and then that tells you, like, okay, I need to cut X, Y, and Z. Going back to my example with personal finances, like, all right, well, I need my internet connection, but maybe I could get rid of, I don't actually know what I would get rid of because I like Netflix. Probably Prime. I think I would get rid of Prime, honestly. I mean, I like it, but, you know, who knows. All right, other financial strategies. Be proactive with customers. This is the big thing. So when I was talking about talking to vendors, you want to be proactive with your customers, right? So the folks who have reached out to me or people who have reached out to their customers are like, you know, it's a difficult time. We are offering you a 20% discount if you renew today as opposed to when your renewal date is up in next month. If you have a retail store, obviously you're going to want to, you're going to have to run some sales and some discounts. But being proactive, and if you have a customer success team or if you're the customer success team, you want to have conversations with people because, again, we're all in this together and we all understand what that's like. And so I wouldn't want somebody to cut me off, and so hopefully that reciprocation is there. What you don't want to do is just be like not saying anything at all. So think about it that way. Another thing is if you have a customer who's close to closing a new customer, you might want to incentivize them. If they give you a discount, let's say it's a month or two in advance, they pay in advance, maybe they get a discount. That gives you cash in the door. And then I think be understanding when customers walk away. I saw an email from a company the other day where a customer had to walk away because they had to cut ties with this particular company, and the CEO of the company that was getting cut sent a terrible email to that customer. And I just think these are one of those moments where people remember your character. People remember how you act in adversity. So you just never know. The entrepreneurial community is getting smaller and smaller by the day. And, 10 years from now, somebody might say, well, I remember when there was that COVID-19 crisis and I had to walk away from this account and the guy or gal sent me a terrible email. I'm not going to work with them. Just, being intentional, being thoughtful during that process. And then finally, I think this is it. Yeah. Finally, other financial strategies around this. So do top-down analysis, right? So this goes back to the financial model. How much runway do you want to have? What do you expect to lose in business? Build a model that supports those assumptions, and then make cuts so you only have to do it once. Again, I don't know the size of the companies, and we could probably talk a little bit more as we get to the end here. But I think if the big thing to take away is once you get to that place where you need to be, and things start to get better, you may want to consider doing business that way going forward. So what do I mean by that? So let's say you have to make all these cuts, but you still continue to get sales and you still continue to grow. You realize what you really need and what you don't need, right? And I think if you can continue to live that way, that's how you can build a profitable, sustainable business. Okay, so resources and links here. I recommend taking a look at the Facebook Small Business Grant Program. So these are grants. They have like $100 million available for small businesses. So I think you should take a look at that. I think that's a link that you should look at. Scaling Up is a book that we all had to read at OVIA as a part of a management initiative, but it has a lot of those resources that I was talking about around having customers pay up front, discounting customers. So let's say this was 6 months ago and everything was great. You can still apply these strategies in good times and have a lot more cash in the bank and prepare for whatever may come next. And we started to do that with our customers. When I was at OVIA, we had a media business, and typically we sold like a cost per click program. People wanted to talk to, let's say, a certain demographic of person. And the total contract would cost $90K. We would say, if you pay the $90K upfront now, it's only like $60K. And that was a check in our bank account. that may or may not have gotten there based on our relationship with the client or how the campaign went. So just something to think about there. Definitely check out that book, Scaling Up. The coronavirus SBA website has all this information. And then the rest of these are articles, tactics, just different things that I saw online about how to navigate this crisis. And I think, what else do I have here? Is that it? I think that is it. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. I think right now we can open it up for questions if people want to unmute themselves and ask a question, or you can send it to the chat. You can feel free to send it to all participants in the chat, or if you prefer it be anonymous, feel free to send it to me, Casey Connors. So we'll just open it up for questions.
Can you hear me?
Tanisha, you have your hand up?
Tamisha, you can unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself.
The hand might have been up from another question.
Okay. If people don't have questions at this time, I want to mention, I see Arnav. Arnav has a question. You can go ahead.
So to unmute yourself, there's an icon to the right of your name. It'd be in the icon as a microphone. Just click that microphone and it should turn on your speaker.
Okay, well,
okay.
You can unmute yourself. Okay, while we see what's happening.
Can you unmute everybody?
If you can please type your question in the chat.
I see a question, I think, in the chat from Tamisha, and I will read it. It says, thank you so much for this. What advice do you have to creative entrepreneurs who are trying to build their customer base in this current climate? What perspectives, strategies do you recommend? What shouldn't we do? Okay, so I will follow up that question with the question. And my question is, by creative entrepreneurs, do we mean, is that like an artistic business, or is that what kind of a business is a creative entrepreneur? If you can answer that. And while you type that in, just in general, if you're trying to build a customer base during this climate, I think over the past 10 years, things have gotten significantly cheaper to do. So, 10, 15 years ago, it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to start a company or do a social media campaign. And today, you can get started with a number of tools relatively easily. I recommend, you could read some of those articles I provided, but there's a person named Brad Feld, who's a venture capitalist, that has some great articles on basically the startup tech stack. So maybe you get obviously you have your Instagram account, you can create a website account, you can do all these different things. Oh, sorry. Made you host? Okay. Sorry about that, Christina.
No worries.
So there's a number of different tools that you can use, and I think that the cheaper ones are really around social media. So if you're a creative entrepreneur, social media tends to be what people are doing, and so I think that.
Great. We have another question. Arnav just came in. His question was to clarify with the payroll program application that will come out tomorrow. Did you say that would not be an online application, but a physical application that we need to get from our local?
Well, that's a good question. What I was told is that, one, that there is some skepticism that the banks will be ready to handle the volume of applications, but I would if you have a banker with your business, I would reach out to that organization and say that you are interested in this and that you would like an application. My understanding is that they would provide one to you. There might be an online application as well, but I understand that it might be your local bank. I just know that local banks are the ones that will be doing the loans, if that makes sense. And so it's not like you're not going to get it from the government. You're going to go, like, if my bank is Bank of America here, I'm going to talk to the bank and say, I'm interested, I have a business bank account, I'm interested in this loan. So hopefully that answers your question.
If I can add to that, part of the reason why the government decided to go this way.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh. What about now?
Yes, better.
No, that I was mentioning that the government also decided to do this choice because it was much faster. Of course, banks have the infrastructure to more quickly vet candidates, and they already know you. They already have a banking relationship with you. They know your score. They know your history. So it'll be faster.
Good question.
Great. Any more questions? I think.
I see one.
Okay.
How are early stage VCs thinking about deal flow during these times? Are all live deals on hold, or are firms trying to push through? What a great question. So you go back to 2008. It was the worst financial crisis ever. There was nothing that was ever going to happen. It was all bad. In 2009, Uber got its first check. Lyft got its first check. And I always blank on the third one. But there's a third company that got their first check. So the answer is deals are still happening. For VCs, this is usually the companies that are more resilient tend to rise to the top. And so, no, deal flow is still happening. So nothing is on hold. People are still doing deals. The criteria for investment is much higher. So, like, again, a year ago, it would be like, oh, you know, you have a PowerPoint and you're a smart person, here's $1 million. And today, there needs to be some underlying assumptions under that business. And in terms of deal flow, it's still similar. I just think that the more resilient business models are rising to the top. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. So I'm going to invite Jatan.
Jayanti.
Welcome.
Jayanti, yeah?
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Jason. Nice to meet you again.
Hello.
Thanks for the inputs. So due to COVID-19, actually, there are more queries and opportunities for our company for remote patient monitoring. So at this time, if I want to hire people, is there a possibility to get grants or loans?
Okay, so you said, so if I understand correctly, the volume of requests from potential customers is going up. And so
Right.
Are there opportunities to get grants or loans to hire people? There are opportunities to get those loans. In terms of grant programs, where are you located? Are you in Massachusetts?
Yes.
Okay. There are some grant programs through some of the programs here. I'm blanking on the names. It might be Mass Tech Collaborative or some others, depending on what you're doing. That, I think, what I would say, or if we were talking from a VC perspective, I would say you probably want to find a way for those customers to pay you so that you can fund hiring, right? So it's probably a chicken and egg problem, but it's also going back to, like, what is it like right now with COVID-19? It's kind of like, well, if we were sitting across the table and I was doing the venture capital thing, I would say, well, that's great. How many potential customers do you have? Well, that's great. Well, can you get them to pay you so that you can fund it? That's probably what people would say, but you might have some loan opportunities, but I would need to do some research on that.
Okay. So, yeah, basically that's the chicken and egg, because they're not going to pay upfront, but they may have orders. So, but I have to pay upfront in order to get it. So that is the kind of situation I am in.
Yeah, so maybe you get them to pay you so that you can buy it. I mean, that's a part of the. I would not to get too deep in the weeds for other people that need questions, but I would make that a part of my sales process. So if you were my customer and you needed something from me and I didn't have the money to do it, I would say, I would love to help you. This is how much it costs to make this tool. And if you pay me in installments, I could get it to you. But that's just the environment that I'm in. I think it's just part of a qualifying process to see how serious some of those potential customers are. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I need orders or I need things, but it's a tough time.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. And I think, Maria, you had a question?
Question. Is regarding the paycheck program, that is also for companies like mine that we are still pre-revenue, but I have employees.
I didn't catch the first part. Did you say that you have revenue or you do not have revenue?
No, we don't have revenue.
Okay. So you can apply for the loan, but you have to pay the loan back. You know, I think they would probably look at that as, you know, you might need to get some sort of collateral or something like that. But if you don't have revenue, there are deferred payments. But if you think you might have revenue in 6 months or, you know, that might be helpful. Now, if you had did you have revenue in 2019?
No, I did not have until 2020, and my company is in aviation, so this year is out.
Got it. Okay. So, I mean, you still may want to look at some of the programs there. I would need to know a little bit more about the business to better understand how you pay your employees, but happy to talk about that offline.
Okay. Okay.
Feel free to LinkedIn me if you have other questions after this for sure. We could talk.
Okay.
But everybody's situation is different, and I get that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Jason, do you have any closing comments? Anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
Thank you, Babson, and I thank everyone for taking the time to join. I know this is a difficult time, but you can get through it, and I'm happy to provide any assistance that I am able to. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of offline conversations, but I welcome them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for your time and your expertise. Thank you, everybody, for attending the call. Again, we will send out the recording as well as the presentation. And then just as a heads up, we have another webinar coming up next week, Wednesday, April 8th, 3 to 4 p.m. It is featuring Beth Santos, CEO of Wonderful. She will be speaking on building an online community during the COVID crisis. So look out for notifications on that. And with that, I think we'll wrap up this call. Thank you again, Jason.